our normal collaborative, and today we're supposed to be talking about some student work. We're going to be assessing it and looking at it using the Atlas format, and I think everybody's got the copy of the student work. It's called Constitution Cafe, and then in front of it you have what's printed is the standard. I turned it sideways so it can be big. And it's the standard and the standard 5 for U.S. history. And we're going to be looking at C, D, and E. And it's related to the Constitution. This is from U.S. history, that's the EOC. But the reason we're looking at this student work is because it's related and helps 9th grade civics and government, where they talk about governmental systems and the Constitution. And then it also impacts world history, 10th grade, when you talk about revolutions in different countries, governments forming. And we all wanted to talk about the same thing and just look at it. So in the Atlas format, as a reminder, we're going to be just objectively looking at this samples of the students' work. We are trying to just assess, what do you actually see? We're not talking about the student, we're not talking about their grades past or present or on any of that. We're just looking at the work, seeing what the student would see, what the student thinks they should be doing, what we require of the student to do, because we're trying to interpret this piece of work so that we can learn, improve our practice. Maybe give better assignments, maybe give clearer instructions. We don't know. We're just trying to look at this work and see what it shows so we can get some implications for future success. Okay? And then last, we will have a reflection on what we could do better, worse, change, modify. And so the first page you have here talks about the standards. Second page is the achievement level descriptors from the state. And we only go look at the right 2 sections, mainly the middle section, because that's proficient. So the work plus our directions to the student should indicate that we are trying to get them to the proficient level. And as you see, I put a square around it at the bottom, and that's where we're going. It says explain specific events and key ideas brought about the adoption and implementation of the Constitution. And then it says, explain the major arguments of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, and that links to the one to the right, which is the distinguished level. So our goal is to get our students to that level, okay? So, did anybody want to say or ask a question on clarity before we start just looking at the work by yourself and making some notes? No? Okay. So we're going to take, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 minutes to make an initial look and make notes on your sheets on the Constitutional Cafe if you want, so that we can talk about it in a few minutes. anybody need any more time? We do have, I set my timer for 6 minutes, about a minute and a half left. Does anybody want a few more minutes, or you want to go ahead and start talking about it? Okay, we go ahead and start talking. Okay, at this point, we just go talk about everything we saw, not assessing whether it met any requirements or anything. Just what did you see on this student's work? I'm gonna jot a couple of notes as people comment or whatever.
I'm not supposed to speak, right?
After everybody else has spoke, since this was your lesson, but you're U.S. history and I'm U.S. and we both did the same assignment. So we'll both let everybody else comment first. Excuse me.
It appears that the student has a clear understanding as to what is expected of them.
Okay, so that's a plus that they understand the expectation.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Looking at the answers, very thorough.
Okay, so you thought this student did thorough and accurate work.
Most definitely.
Okay. Anybody else see anything that you want to comment on or thought?
The activities are aligned with the elements that's addressed.
That's what you thought?
Yes,
Okay, that's,
on the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Venn
Okay.
diagram,
so the Fed anti-federalists for sure, you're saying?
and element, standard H6 element, I want to say element H5 element A, Anti-Federalist and Federalist
Okay.
debate.
That's 5D, yep.
They also explain the key features of the Constitution, so that's 5C.
5C, key features, cool. Great. Anything else sticks out about just looking at the work? Then we'll go cover whether we think it met the standard or not, how much more. Okay. Does it meet the requirement for what was asked on the cover sheet, the Constitutional Cafe? Did they do something for each of the, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections? Was there something for all 5 sections? And did that section of their work in this artifact show that they did what was required from the teacher? That one's generic. We can comment on that one probably.
They did it done.
Yeah. On this sample, yes, the student did all 5 parts, did
Right.
something from all 5 parts. So as far as interpreting the student meeting their requirements, it would be a plus because this student's work, they did do something for all 5 categories. So they completed the work, completed the assigned work. So that'd be a plus. Was there any minuses with this, or just interpreting the student's work versus the assignment, versus what was required?
You asked whether there's some minuses
Yes, we got a plus that this student at least turned in something
from each
for
of the
each of the 5
categories.
categories that were required. Now, is there anything that, was lacking on this student's work? And then we'll talk about whether it meets the standard, I guess, what the implications are for this piece of work, these 5 sheets meeting the requirement for the standard and the achievement level descriptors. I didn't get a minus. I thought the student tried to do everything that was in the Constitution Cafe menu, and whichever one they chose is what they did. So that's a plus. I don't see a minus because everything that they were asked to do, they did something for the 5 categories.
Yeah, and even looking at the achievement level descriptors for the proficient and distinguished levels, I was looking to see if some pieces were missing. Could you describe like the specific events and key ideas that brought about the adoption? In particularly, I know the key events would probably be the Constitutional Convention. That's one key event. Those people who represented those important states
That would have been at the Constitutional Convention.
Right, and how those people who represented those states came with their own different plans. Is there something that the student in this particular assignment needed to have more of in order to meet the proficient or the distinguished level and achievement level descriptors, or they tackled everything?
Can I say something?
At this point, we're talking about education, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you also look at the appetizers, looking at the weaknesses and the strengths of the Articles of Confederation, those are key events and the key problems that led to the creation of the need for the Constitution. The only thing that I would say, it's definitely missing out on a specific addressing of Shays' Rebellion.
Okay.
But by analyzing and looking at the weaknesses and strengths, which would be A and B of 5, they should be getting, theoretically anyway, the key things that led to the need for a constitution, which then flows into the Constitutional Convention stuff, who attended, who didn't, all that.
Okay.
And that's kind of the way the assignment is set up, as the appetizers first. And it talks about standard A and B and in the respects of the things that led to the Constitution. And that's what the title is, creating the Constitution.
Okay.
And I would agree that Shays' Rebellion was left off. The only other thing might have been if it also required the Northwest Ordinance and the Land Ordinance, because that's how westward expansion happened.
But they could have included that as a strength.
Right, and that was my expectation that they would put as a strength.
Okay.
That's only if they chose number 2. But if they had only chose number 1, they would have only got the weaknesses.
True. Or 3.
Or right. So I was just,
So 2 and 4 would have worked, but 1 and 3 probably not.
You said
Yeah.
2 and 4 for the appetizers?
yeah, if they had done 2 and 4 for the appetizer, then they would have got what was required in 5A and B. But if they had happened to choose 1 or 3, they would not have learned everything that was required for standard A and B.
Okay.
So maybe, I guess that's reflection part. If we were to do this again, we would include something in 1 and 3 that ensures that they learn in standard A and B also.
Okay.
And it can be the acrostic, because I think students like that, and if they do it, then it, I guess, will cover the
Another
other
element.
part that covers the other 2 elements. Anybody else? What'd you what'd you think, Mr. Frazier, about the, this part is not part of government, civics government, but as far as democracy and all of that, the Constitution in itself. But any thoughts on these activities? Do you guys, at the civics government level, I don't remember, do anything on the Articles of Confederation? I think you just talked about Confederation, didn't it?
No, we talked
As a
about
form of government.
a little bit of the Articles of Confederation. We actually did this same Constitutional Cafe menu, but it's a little different. We made some tweaks to it, but we did talk about that because it did deal with the Constitutional Convention, how it led up to democracy and how it led up to writing the new Constitution. That makes sense.
Sure.
I like the way that the kids were asked, because we did this to ask to formulate their own questions. So it kind of gives you an understanding of, did they really understand what they were doing and how could they get to the answers themselves? So it made sense to me to
Have a section where they have to
section
create questions.
where you have to create questions. But I also would have, just for coming back to it, I also would limit the choices so that you can touch what's in the standard. So when you said 1 and 3, and 2 and 3, I would have probably used those as choices and erased the other choices. So
Okay.
then then they can understand, or I can get an understanding if they really understood where we're going.
Okay. So maybe just a few
Yeah,
limit some of the
maybe some
choices,
choices, yeah.
and then you can focus them on the actual sub-element.
Yep.
And when you said about what you guys did a little different, was it like scaffolded down?
Yep.
And took stuff out, like
stuff out.
Federalist, Anti-Federalist, or ratification?
We used Federalist and Anti-Federalist, but we took out, I can't remember what we took out in here, but we took out some of the things. Oh, we took out number 1, and then we took out number 4.
Okay,
And that's just only because with our 2 different classes, my 3rd period classes, this didn't kind of work with them.
Okay.
But my 4th period class, it worked for them. So we got a fixation of where we were in terms of classes.
Right. But the Constitutional Convention is not part of the civic standard, is it?
Yes, it's in there.
Okay, okay. Anybody else have a reflection or a thought on maybe how this activity could have been maybe improved, modified, changed, so that students would get, the standard is what we instructionally designed to, but the achievement level descriptors, proficient level, is what we're supposed to be ensuring that we can assess that they accomplish. And if you look at proficient, it just says they can explain specific events, ideas, adoption, and then explain major arguments, federalist, anti-federal, all of that. And the same thing applies in the distinguished level, that they can investigate and evaluate and all of that. So I guess the questions, would that meet the requirement of that they can explain if they give it back to us? Or should it be maybe a summary or a narrative, something different, or?
I think, like for the Federalist, Anti-Federalist, for example, I think it needs to be explained, but it fails to allow a place for the children to get to the distinguished aspect, because it doesn't draw on the evaluate. If you were gonna evaluate, you would have to have some sort of, this is why one side was better, or how they meet that. So I think it's good in terms of proficient level, but if we wanna push our students, which you always do with the choice boards, there always should be an option to push beyond proficient, that they need to have some sort of evaluation. Maybe write a Federalist paper, Anti-Federalist paper, something of that. It also fails to address including the Bill of Rights. Now, the expectation was that that would be where they, compromise would be in the middle of like the Venn diagram, or it would somewhere come in there, but there's nothing explicit saying that you have to discuss the Bill of Rights in the activity.
So that would be back then with a shortcoming in design here, that
For
in the
desserts,
future,
yeah.
we need to have something related to the compromises. If they're doing the VIN in the middle, it should have had the compromise, the Bill of Rights, the 3/5 and the Great Compromise.
No, those compromises come up here, just the Bill of
We
Rights.
got them in here.
Yeah, because that's on number 4.
Those were compromises at the convention. This is a
I see it,
compromise over
okay.
ratification.
Yeah,
And I like what you said, that even if they're doing this Venn diagram and they're comparing it, at the end, what are we doing with these notes that they're taking? So that part comes in with the investigation. They can definitely do some type of constructive response or an extension assignment, especially for our higher students or students who are ready to keep moving. And that'll bring them up to the distinguished level.
so I'm making me some notes right on here, so when I redesign it, we can make these changes.
You can definitely use race. It's not
The-
CSIP.
Okay, race is an idea as a strategy to use, race to put in there on the assignment.
No,
Does not meet distinguished, I'm just making notes, go ahead, we can keep talking. Meets
well, I was just gonna say, I didn't get a chance to say
proficiency.
something earlier about that's important for everyone, especially people that teach other classes, to recognize is that when you look at part 2 of the side dishes, where the child is drawing out the compromises, there's a very clear misconception under the Commerce Compromise of what that compromise actually was. So a lot of the students are, and I found this overall in grading, that a lot of students are misunderstanding that the compromise was you can control interstate commerce, but leave the slave trader alone. They were viewing that as 2 separate compromises and not really getting the connection between the two. So that's an important thing, since this is something they have to know in all the classes, that we hit hard in civics, so when they come up to US history, they've got a foundation of that, knowing that that's the actual compromise there, because that's, lays out the foundation of everything going up to the Civil War, is like, where were these compromises about slavery and how did it play out?
And the commerce part with trade or money will help support economics, for seniors, understanding financial parts and all of that for economics.
And then
So
when you
us
look
doing
at
that
the,
helps econ.
and one, when you talked about 3/5 compromise too, they clearly get that 5 slaves equals 3 free people, but it has no indication as to for what,
Representation,
for what
why.
purpose, what are they representing? Like, so they need to be pointing out, if they were doing a better job of this, they need to be pointing out in terms of what, taxation representation. It's not just that we said 3 people count as 5.
Does
So,
it make a requirement that they must explain each one of their pictures? It just says, describe it, draw a picture representing, and that's it.
well, she said, she
It should,
indicated she was
it's
doing a
both
comic
sides.
strip, but I don't see a comic strip. I see 3.
That's
instead
what
of
I saw
5.
too. I thought it was 3. I did not think it was 5.
So it's, I think some of them are better than others in terms of the design and guiding the kid where we want them to go. So they might need to be a little bit more
So
specifics
maybe a
on
little
the
more
part
clarity
2.
in descriptions.
But it's important to understand that there's a misconception there that seems to be pretty widely, based on looking at all of them, pretty widely shared. That we need
So
to make sure they
majority of them you saw the same kind of thing?
So we would
So
probably
it's
need
clarity and
some type
instruction,
of
that's what we
a
write.
rubric or some type of checklist
Rubric?
when we're giving out something like this.
Rubric would work. So we've completed assessing the student work. We've interpreted what we thought we saw. We've talked about the implications of how this ties into civics government. US, obviously, Ms. Lamar with AP, they would anybody, for her section, your kids would be doing something even more in-depth than this and looking at it. And then the commerce part, or the few places where it's economically related, that helps econ for seniors. So where are we? We've reflected. We're talking about changes that would improve this so that the student would be more successful and closer meet the standard or the achievement level descriptors. Is there any final comment or thought before we wrap up with assessing this piece of, this artifact, this piece of work? Any lingering thing that we just have not considered? If the student gets this new modified Constitution Cafe, will it do what we want it to do as far as them being able to explain, analyze, investigate, evaluate?
I believe so.
Or does something else need to be put in it? Is it gonna be then too challenging, too difficult? Will we need to modify or, well, we were talking about streamlining, taking a few things out so we could beef up some things to be sure they met the standard and achievement level descriptors.
And if we take those out,
So if we
we can
take them
definitely
out,
implement
then
some of those strategies.
we can put some other things in.
Yeah.
So our expectation would be that the student would be more successful, they would be closer to proficient or distinguished based on the standards and achievement level descriptor. So I guess from here, next semester, when we teach Constitution Cafe again, we need to be sure we talk about this one specific thing versus our notes from this occasion. And I'll be sure we keep one sample of this work so we can look at it the next time. Everybody in agreement or think? Okay.
So I want to just say this last little piece that we reached and we hit every part of this protocol. We talked about the strategies, we talked about the teacher's next step for the students in the future. We also discussed what could be taken away from this particular assignment, as well as we discussed what kinds of assessments. Now, the students created their own assessments for this activity, so that did take care of some of those skills that are addressed in the standard for the explaining and examining. In the end, once the students have completed this, we have several different assessments
Assessment
that's been reached. So this was a great, I think this was a great activity that you gave the students for U.S. history.
An assessment, speaking at the tail end of that, we use Illuminate, and we've done some Illuminate. We do USA Test
And
Prep,
that writing
where they
piece
can do
too.
sample sort. And in the Illuminate that the district provided, there is writing prompts for them to answer things. So
Okay.
there's other ways for us to look at how this panned out outside of their actual work product. So that's a good deal.
Is this a good process that we're doing? This particular protocol?
Yeah.
Or-
Yep.
That's good.
I think so,
Okay,
yeah.
all right. All right, thank you.
We probably want to, the only thing I think is, if we can, we probably would need to look at more than just one sample in this amount of time, because I guess it's taking us a minute. So maybe if we got to look at one US and maybe one from civics government, even if it didn't relate, or if it did relate, then it shows how things are tied together.
Vertical curriculum.
Integration, yes. So
All right.
that's it. Now, I guess we're going back to our regular planning
Yeah.
from this point.
Everyone can move back to their
Yeah, what's today, Thursday? So we'll do some world history.